You hear it in popular music all the time. The relationship's going great, and then the feeling goes away, and suddenly it's like, well, I guess that's over. Story ends. That might be one thing in romance, but what does this mean when it happens in your spiritual life? Like when the feeling's gone and when your faith feels like a dry desert, and you're staring at the ceiling thinking, is there any way to get back to where we used to be? And if that's where you are right now, I want you to know something up front. You're not weird, you're not alone, and there is a way back to a close personal relationship with God. My name is Mike Collins, and this is Groundwork. Today we're talking about spiritual dry spells, what they are, why they happen, and some practical handholds that can help you to walk through without panicking or pretending. When I think about a spiritual dry spell, the word that comes to mind for me is disorienting. It's the feeling of looking around and thinking, like everybody else in the room is in the throne room of heaven with God, and my feet are still firmly planted on the ground. You're in the room, like you're present, you're doing all the right things, but you still feel disconnected. I can speak from personal experience. But a spiritual dry spell can also look like reaching for these warm, fuzzy feelings that you used to have and not being able to find them. Teenagers go through this a lot after summer camp. You know, they have that final cry night on the last night of camp and everyone's hugging and making promises. But then two weeks later, they're sitting in their room thinking, like, what happened? There's this letdown. And the first thought is usually something must be wrong with me, or I must have done something wrong. And then we step into that trap word, the word should. If I were the Christian I should be, I wouldn't be feeling this. I'd be on fire all the time. I'd be enthusiastic 100% of the time. I'd be floating 3 inches off the ground. And the minute we start talking like this, we start living under pressure instead of God's grace. I'm not trying to be cute or vulgar, but a lot of us should all over ourselves. We start trying to drum up these feelings or work ourselves up into some kind of spiritual frenzy because we think that closeness to God is always a feeling of euphoria. So when we think like that, we try to behave our way into it, and we try to manufacture those feelings of closeness. We try to force it. And usually that makes it worse, not better. Here's one of the first things I would say to someone in a dry spell. What you're feeling is normal, and it isn't forever. It feels like a new permanent reality when you're in it, but it isn't permanent. The Psalms are an amazing place to go when you're in a spiritual dry spell because they don't pretend. Psalm 63 says, "My soul thirsts for you in a dry and weary land." When you're thirsty, that's all you can think about. When you're hot, that's all you can think about. So if you're in that place spiritually, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you. It may simply mean that you're aware of your thirst. That's a good thing. I've had to learn an anchor that is simple and it's steady. And here it is. This is a moment and it will pass. I know, I get it. This too shall pass sounds like a cliche, but I hang on to it because I need to. There was a season when my first daughter was born and I hadn't slept well in at least 8 or 9 weeks. Too short sleep, very interrupted sleep. And I was talking to my uncle who was an empty nester. And he said, "Oh, Mike, you're going to miss those times." I'm not exaggerating. I wanted to punch him in the neck when he said that. I blinked, and those 17 years, they went by fast. And my uncle was right. I missed those days. But that doesn't invalidate how hard that time was when I was going through it. But it reminds me of how a moment feels like it's endless when you're in the middle of it. So I want to validate how it feels for you right now when you're going through a spiritual dry spell. And at the same time, I want to tell you the truth. It is not forever. And you can make it through. One of the most important things to say next in this: spiritual dry spells aren't always caused by something you did wrong. I'll say it again. Spiritual dry spells aren't always caused by something you did wrong. Sometimes they're a sign of growth. Sometimes they're a sign that you need rest. Sometimes they're a sign that you're grieving. Sometimes there's a sin that needs to be brought into the light, but often it's not one thing. It's usually interrelated. So let me give you several common causes, and I'll list them. And I want you to hear this with curiosity, not with a finger waving at you or any kind of condemnation. I want to help you. So first, spiritual dryness can be connected to your physical state. You're not just a mind on a stick. Like, you have an integrated body. You may be emotionally exhausted. You may be physically exhausted. Those are very real dynamics. Our bodies and souls are incredibly interconnected. And when your body is depleted, your spirit and your emotions will feel depleted too. Second, spiritual dryness can come from unconfessed sin, or even just like a shame, or a fear, and an image management kind of a thing. Sometimes it isn't that you're actively running from God, but you're always hiding. And hiding always creates distance, like we think we could hide from God. We're at our best when people see us at our worst and love us anyway. And the same is true in our relationship with God. Third, spiritual dry spells can come from getting out of the rhythms of our life that are the healthiest for us. It's not always purposeful. It's not like you wake up and say, today I'm going to abandon everything that nourishes me and my soul. No, it's a little drift. It's life. It's spiritual habits. Habits, good, healthy habits like prayer, Sabbath, solitude, scripture, getting together with other believers. These natural rhythms, they're not there because God's checking a list to see if you're behaving. They're there because they nourish your soul. God wants these things for you. When you stop feeding your soul gets hungry. And you might want to interpret that, and sometimes you can interpret it as God's far away from me. That actually might be spiritual hunger. Fourth, and this is real, heartbreak and trauma and grief can create dryness. If you're grieving, your body and emotions are reacting to something hard. You may feel foggy. You probably do. You probably feel numb. You may feel like you're just hanging on by a fingernail. That doesn't mean you don't have faith. It means that you're human. And fifth, sometimes there's a deeper underlying issue, and there's absolutely no shame in talking to a counselor or a therapist. Sometimes you need to call in the big guns. There are seasons when what's happening spiritually is all tangled up with depression or anxiety, panic, or a medical issue. Medication changes, or maybe it's sleep deprivation or hormone issues, chronic pain, or some unresolved trauma. Those are real dynamics. Getting help is not spiritual failure. Getting help is wisdom. Now, I want to add something important here. There's a saying that people throw this around a lot, like that if you don't feel close to God, guess who moved? And of course, sometimes that's true. Sometimes we drift. But sometimes what's really happening is your nervous system is fried and you can't feel much of anything. So if you're going to use that phrase, you've got to use it carefully. It can be a gentle mirror, but it could be a hammer. So this is where Elijah helps me so much, because his story is what a lot of us expect life with God to be like. And then it suddenly isn't. So Elijah has this massive confrontation with the prophets of Baal. Fire shows up from heaven. Imagine that. God shows up. Baal didn't. If I were writing the story, that's the end. Credits roll. God wins. But right after that, this mountaintop moment, Elijah gets word that Jezebel wants him dead. It's not the kind of woman you want to tick off. And he goes from the spiritual high to a legitimate emotional crash. He's running for his life, and then he hits the wall. And you can read the story, and when you do, you can feel the adrenaline just drain out of him. Now, here's what's so important. God didn't begin by scolding Elijah. God doesn't begin by lecturing Elijah. God begins by caring for Elijah's body. God puts him to sleep, and then God wakes him up, and an angel feeds him bread, and then Elijah goes back to sleep. And I know, I tend to overuse this line, but there's so much truth in it. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. And after God cared for Elijah's physical needs, rest and nourishment, then Elijah comes to the mouth of the cave and God speaks. And God's voice isn't in the wind, it isn't in the storm or the dramatic spectacle. It comes as a still, small voice. And that matters because a lot of people interpret these dry spells as God isn't speaking. Sometimes God is speaking, and sometimes God is speaking more quietly than you're used to. Sometimes you're maturing. Sometimes God is trusting you with his silence. I get it. I've been there. It can be terrifying. It's not punishment. And I think the Elijah story also confronts something else. We live in a world with loud voices that tell you what you're worth and what your value is, what success is. These voices say you only matter if you have the likes on social media and the followers or the degrees hanging on your wall or all the stuff in your house, the latest, greatest technology, or all the voices around you giving you approval. Those are loud voices, but they're not the voice of Jesus. Jesus' voice is often quieter and steadier and gentler. You matter. Not you matter if. You matter, not just you matter if you're performing well. No. When we trade Jesus' definition of worth for our culture's definition of worth, it leaves you and I feeling empty. And that emptiness often shows up as spiritual dryness. I used to think pastors didn't have episodes like this. I didn't think they did until I became one of those pastors going through a spiritual dry spell. I was a film and theater major in college, and when I got to the end of that, I realized that I didn't want to go and spend the rest of my life being rejected at audition after audition. And as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I started thinking, what can I do where I won't face so much rejection? Oh, I know, I'll be a pastor. It's famous last words. And I've shared this publicly, so I'm not saying anything that's a secret here, but when I was a youth pastor, especially at the beginning, I would quit every Wednesday night. After service, I'd get moody, I'd get pouty. And every Wednesday after a youth group, it was horrible. And I wasn't clinically depressed, but I was definitely discouraged. And what helped me was finally talking about this with my wife. We're debriefing after another Wednesday. And she asked me this question that changed how I saw everything. She said, "Mike, what are you expecting these middle schoolers to do in the response to your sermons?" And I didn't have to think long. It was an honest answer. All I'm expecting is these 12-year-olds to walk around in sackcloth and ashes and repent for their wicked ways. Is that too much to ask? That's a reasonable Wednesday night expectation, right? And it was her question. She didn't have to lecture me. I needed someone outside of my headspace, someone with a different perspective to help me gain the picture of what was really going on. I needed to adjust my expectations to be right-sized for those precious 12 to 14-year-olds. And I wasn't able to work it out on my own. So I've found that the performance pressures of ministry, the pressures of spiritual dryness and the discouragement that life can throw at us, it easily pushed me into thinking, must be me. I must be doing something wrong. Maybe it is unconfessed sin, or a lot of the times it turns out I was actually working too hard, or I was actually carrying too much, trying to solve everything on my own. Because I'm smart and I think I can figure it out. I've come to see that it's God's mercy, and in God's mercy, God will sometimes let you get to the end of how far your gifts and talents can take you. Not to shame you, not to torture you. God lets you get to the end of how far you can take yourself to free you. That's the moment you realize, I need help from God. I need help from other people. And I'll be honest, it isn't like you have this one insight and then the clouds clear forever. You can just throw everything into cruise control, set autopilot. No, there's a phrase from the recovery movement that I say to myself all the time. It says, you can be 10 miles down the road and still 10 feet from the ditch. Life moves fast. And if you and I don't intentionally carve out time to feed our souls and spend time with Jesus, of course we're going to end up burnt out, angry, depressed, and even how I got there. That's why it matters to watch out for these warning signs. One of the most helpful little tools I've learned is actually another recovery acrostic, HALT. It stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Those are danger signs. And they're not really like some sort of sign that you're a bad Christian. They're not that at all. They're like the check engine light that comes on our car dashboards from time to time. So when you're feeling like you're spiraling, when I feel like I'm spiraling, or I can tell when I'm reactive, I call it weird Mike, or when I feel dry, one of the first helpful questions I ask myself is, am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I angry? Am I lonely? A lot of times, like, the most spiritual next step is something very unromantic, like eating a nutritious meal, or as simple as calling a friend, or going to bed at a decent hour. This is also why I want to be careful and say again, sometimes dryness isn't primarily spiritual or spiritual warfare. Sometimes it's medical, sometimes it's depression, sometimes it is anxiety, and sometimes you need a doctor, a counselor, or both. Elijah's story gives you permission to treat the whole person, not just the spiritual part of you. So now if you're thinking, okay, what do I actually do? Like, I want to give you handholds. And I want to say up front, this isn't a formula that's going to just magically make all your problems go away. It's not a 1, 2, 3 and like set it and forget it. These handholds can change based on your stage of life. Like when I was younger, I needed inertia. I just needed to keep moving. I'd crank the worship music and I'd praise and dance and pray my way through a spiritual dry spell. And that worked for a season of life in my mid-20s and into my mid-30s. But now that I'm older, the loud, fast music, sometimes it just stresses me out, honestly. So my practices have changed. I like to think that I've grown to expand other things. And one practice that's become a lifeline for me is simply sitting in silence and listening for God. I use a timer. There's an app on my phone. And I sit there. And I'm not trying to do the Zen Buddhist thing of completely emptying myself so I become empty. No, when I sit in silence, I'm trying to make space in my heart and mind and even, in my physical reactions, I'm trying to make space for God. And I'm trying to make space so I can hear God. I'm just trying to get quiet long enough to notice God, because God might be whispering. And my mind wanders all the time. I hear people say this, like it's, I can't pray, my mind wanders. Of course, that's what your mind is going to do. So when I realize my mind is wandering, I say, okay, welcome back. Good job. You came back to prayer again. Just say things like that. I'll focus on like a simple little word while I'm sitting in silence, like joy or peace, and then I'll just listen. And I haven't ever heard God's audible voice, but there have been times where I know, like in my gut, that God is speaking. And even if it isn't like dramatic, And that quiet time with God, it recalibrates my perspective. And another handhold for me is keeping a Sabbath. I'm not legalistic about it, but my soul needs 24 hours each week to remind myself I'm not God. I know that sounds weird to say, because I know that I'm not God. I keep forgetting it, because apparently my calendar doesn't know it, and my nervous system doesn't know it, my ambition doesn't know it. So I have this rhythm in my life of every 6 days, the Sabbath is my weekly way of preaching to myself, Mike, the world's going to keep on turning without your constant effort. For me, Sabbath looks like no to-do lists and a lot less phone time. And it's not always the same because every week and every season of life is different. But I make sure to get a real window where I'm not producing anything and I'm not chasing anything. Take a day to just play, delight in the Lord. It sounds so religious. And every time I come out of one of those days of Sabbath and resting, it's really weird. The economy still exists. Solid Ground Church is still here, and somehow God still has the whole world in his hands. And another handhold for me would be helpful for you is just getting outside. And I'm grateful, so grateful to live around some amazing hiking trails. And they're not fancy, and it's not dramatic. It's just going out into the closest woods around me. It doesn't have to feel religious, but that stuff clears the junk out of my head and out of my heart, and it's like my soul can breathe again. And sometimes we think we need a special hoop to jump through to get out of a spiritual dry spell, and it may be as simple as fresh air and movement. Now, I can totally hear someone saying, Mike, I've tried all those things before and it hasn't worked. What's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? Take a deep breath. And I want to answer that clearly. Nothing is wrong with you. Welcome to the human race. These practices aren't a switch you flip and suddenly everything's fine. So here are three more foundational handholds that no matter what stage of life you're in, that you should try on. So first, be honest with God. If you're mad at God, tell God. God can handle it if you're mad at him. If you're disappointed, tell him. God can handle it. Seriously, read through the Psalms. Read the accounts of Abraham after God changed his name, talking to God. Very honest conversations. Moses, I love reading Moses' conversations with God. You gave these people to me? What? I can't go any further. Those conversations are so authentic, and God didn't strike them down for it. Honesty is often the first step out of the fog. Number 2, slow down and rest. Most of us are trying to keep up the pace that we were never designed for. We weren't meant to be on and reachable and respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is why Sabbath matters. I once read an article that even zoo animals are healthier when they're not on display 7 days a week. So I guess even polar bears need a break. So if you've been living like you're in this constantly on mode, dryness may be your soul's way of waving the red flag and saying, hey, we can't do this forever. And third, involve other people. I don't know anyone who gets themselves unstuck alone. That's the beauty of friends, especially friends that see your blind spots and love you anyway. And a lot of us pride ourselves on not needing to help. I think one of the saddest phrases that we throw around is a self-made man, a self-made woman. Because when you're really stuck, you often are stuck and you can't get out and you need help because your brain is using the same tool that got you stuck in the first place. Sometimes you need someone else's brain to see another solution, someone to climb down into the hole that you're in and say, yeah, validate your pain. This hole that you're in, this is hard. I see the way out. I'm getting out now. You follow me. And you follow them out of the hole that you're in. So this is a big deal because a lot of us never say this out loud, but We go to Bible studies and life groups and talk about almost anything, but we won't say, I'm not feeling it. A lot of us won't say, I feel distant. A lot of us won't say, I'm foggy. And we keep that in secret. What's wild is that when you don't name it, it's harder to create distance from it, and you can't tell the difference between yourself and these feelings. But when you say, I'm just not feeling close to God, already you're saying there's a feeling, and that's not me. So bringing it into the light is one of the most revolutionary things you can do for your mind, your body, and your soul. Isolation and keeping it secret tells you that you're the only one. The light tells you that you're not alone. The letter of Philippians carries this image of someone exhausted and parched, and another person coming alongside and putting an arm around them and helping carry the load. That's what faith looks like in community. So as we wrap up, I want to give you one sentence to carry with you if you're in a dry spell right now. Here we go. Your feelings aren't the measure of your faithfulness. Your feelings are real, and they matter, and they're worth paying attention to. But the presence or absence of spiritual emotion isn't the scoreboard of your relationship with God. God is still speaking. God still has you. And if you read the scriptures honestly, one of the major themes is that God meets people in the wilderness. God creates something out of nothing. God brings what's dead back to life. So, if you're walking through a spiritual dry spell, please don't go through it alone. Talk to God honestly. Slow down enough to rest and bring someone else into the story. And if the fog or if it's deep and prolonged, don't be afraid to talk to a counselor or a therapist or a doctor. That isn't faithless. That's courage. This may not be the end of your story. It may be the beginning of a renewal you can't see yet. Thanks for spending these minutes with me on Groundwork. Stay encouraged, stay connected, and I'll see you next time.